I'll introduce Raquel, if I may. So Raquel Silvestre is a diversity, inclusion and participation manager at Health Education England, with a background in community and organisational development, culture transformation and leadership development. Raquel has grown to become an equality, diversity, inclusion professional. Her current role in HE focuses on promoting and embedding a culture of inclusion and belonging through individual, collective and systemic change. Hello, Raquel. Thanks for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here. It's a pleasure. And thank you for the introduction. So this slide shouldn't be here because this was the reward for punctuality. But for some reason, I cannot seem to take it down. So it will stay there. And I would really like to see as many faces as possible. If you feel comfortable to open your or have your camera on. If you are having lunch or you don't feel comfortable, that's fine. But it actually helps the interaction and for us to have a sense of your visual reactions to what we're doing as well. So it really helps. Thank you very much. So as Mike introduced this session, distributed leadership for inclusion. We will start with a moment of self-reflection. So we'll use a number of polls where I ask you to be as honest as you can be, as they are completely anonymous. So this will be it's one of the actions that we can take, as in our behaviors, our ways of thinking. One of the actions to be inclusive is to become more and more aware of our own thoughts, of other people's thoughts. So it's the first step in that journey. So it will enable us. Oh, why is this moving now? All the time. It will enable us to just move to move along that journey, that inclusion journey. So to start with, I don't know if you, from your side, Mike, if you can take the slides down.
Let me have a look for you.
Oh yeah, fantastic.
Has that worked?
It did, yes.
Right,
that's
okay.
really good. And we can see more people as well.
Success.
That's great, fantastic. So yes, so I'll bring up the first poll, and as I mentioned, is anonymous. So raising that self-awareness, and then for you to then think about what will you do with that increased awareness of where you are in your inclusion journey. So to start with, let me then release the first one. Just bear with me. This takes some conscious thinking. Right. So I'm launching the first poll. So how often do you spend in self-exploration, asking yourself why you believe what you believe, why you think what you think? So as you submit your answer, you'll be able to see other people's answer.
So we have approximately about 50 people on the call, so we're about there with the numbers.
That's great. Right, so people are, I think, a few more answers there. So it's we've got 11% never think about why they believe what they believe and why they think what they think. We've got 50% sometimes, 35% often. So it's we can see that it's something that we are increasingly doing. And if you answered never, then perhaps this will be a first step to start thinking about, where does my opinion come from? Where does that, why do I think that? And then we go under we go underneath what we can see and understand our own processes of thinking and where those come from. Right, so the second question, I'm launching it. How often do you consider how others might have, how and why others might have a different worldview? Some people are still joining in. So these are some polls for self-reflection. They completely anonymous. So feel free to answer as honestly as you can then use your raised awareness to move you forward in your inclusion journey. So how often do you consider how and why others might have a different worldview? All right, so we have, I think we have some inclusion champions in the room. So 54% often consider, and 28-30 now, sometimes, and quite a percentage on always as well, considering how and why others might have a different worldview. So the more often we do this, the more inclusive or open we become to the possibilities of doing things differently as well. Because as we increase that curiosity and expand our reach to what others are thinking and how and why, then we may also benefit in terms of the decisions that we make, the outcomes of our work, and the best decisions for all. So that's great. 0% said never. So that's a good start.
Does that surprise you, Raquel? Any of the results we've seen so far from the two polls?
Yes, it's quite surprising, but it also depends on the reality and what we wish for. So we may assume that we are open to other people's beliefs and different ways of thinking. Then the question perhaps would be, when you actually confronted with a different opinion, particularly a completely different opinion or opposing opinion, what do you do? So what is your reaction? Is it to step in and have that open conversation to explore why would you think that way, or where does that come from? Or is it like shutting down completely or revalidating what your opinion is instead of the other? So it's again, it's open for self-reflection, but also being mindful of, as we think now consciously, when we are confronting that situation, to become aware of our behaviors. Even facial expressions in meetings can tell something different. So it's raising awareness and then thinking, what am I going to do with this increased awareness? That is the moment of change. Okay, next question. To what extent do you have effective and meaningful conversations across different dimensions of diversity? Never, sometimes, often, or always. So to what extent? So having those, so this is reality. To what extent do you feel you are having effective and meaningful conversations across different dimensions of diversity? So these different dimensions of diversity could be exploring different lived experiences based on protected characteristics, like, for example, race, disability, sexual orientation, gender identity. So where are you in this? Oops. Let's see what you adding here. Right, so we have similar in the never and always. Well, 7% never. Sometimes and often still falls in the majority, so sometimes 60%. So we are starting to have some conversations in terms of self-reflection. What stops us? What kind of themes do you feel most comfortable with? And what are the themes or topics that you feel least comfortable with? So this is all part of that self reflection. But considering that having these meaningful conversations is key to understanding each other, to actually bridging between what you believe and how, and understanding why you believe and uh, um, behave the ways you do and what other people's worldview are, it's important that we feel more and more comfortable in having these meaningful conversations. So the next question is actually will give us an idea of what is an effective and meaningful conversation to you. So you'll be able to add your visions of what would you see as a meaningful conversation to you, so that we understand, we create that common vision of how or what that would look like. And you have the possibility of adding more to it. We're starting to see a cloud creating. So active listening seems to be the biggest criteria for a meaningful conversation. Respect, honest, open, actively engaged. Of course, we could have a conversation just about what each one of these would mean to you as well, and then pull out what would be the ideal, meaningful, effective, productive conversation. Positive, open discussion, open and honest listening, mutual authenticity, honest, open, seems to genuine opinions. Mutual understanding. This is great. Listening, safe. Oh, I even lose the where they are. Points of yes.
Near 80 responses so far. That's what I'm such a fan of, these kind of word clouds, because it does open things out, make us think differently about what's happening in the space. And yeah, there's lots and lots of great things coming in.
It does. Yes. That mutual authenticity. So being authentic and being able to be authentic in the workplace is one of the enablers, but also outcome of an inclusive organization. A colleague yesterday, and I shared today in a morning session, described this as feeling free to be. So it's that sense of belonging. So how can we enable each other to belong and to then have this safe space where we can be uncomfortable, but we still hold that sense of safety, of understanding, of active listening. Thank you very much. I'll have I think it's the last one. There's still people coming in. Okay. So one more poll for reflection. To what, oh, this should be extent, sorry. To what extent do you feel prepared to work to understand and develop yourself so you reduce discrimination attitudes and beliefs? So to what extent do you feel prepared to work So in a way to advance equity.
So we have about 60
Okay.
people on the call at the moment, Raquel, just to give you an idea of the responses we might receive.
Fantastic, thank you. Right, we've got quite a high number of people very prepared, so that is encouraging. Somewhat prepared, 53%. Neither prepared nor unprepared, so neither here or there. Maybe after this session, you will feel a bit more prepared, very unprepared. But thank you for your honesty. So we've got different levels of readiness. And of course, this is really important to acknowledge that we are all in different parts of our journey towards inclusion. But after having that self-awareness of where you are, you can then decide, okay, where do I want to be and how am I going to get there? And hopefully that's the distributed leadership for inclusion will offer that tool or framework to move you towards your goal. Right, I think I can close this one down. Yeah.
Thanks, Raquel. Yeah, brilliant.
Yes.
And I think there was a comment in the chat just to say if people did want to look at the word cloud, I think it was from Gareth at Leeds Community Healthcare Trust, just to sort of click on the more icon to share the number of responses. So if people want to do that, they can.
Okay. Very good. So this is actually the last one, the last poll. And how does your personal commitment to advance equity show up on a day-to-day basis? So particularly those who said that they're somewhat prepared, very prepared. How does your personal commitment to advance equity show up? So how do you demonstrate that commitment at the moment, not where you want to be? So at the moment, how does that commitment is manifested in your daily life? And even if you don't feel prepared to put in the work, you still may feel committed. So how does that show? So what kind of actions are those? I see that the action is becoming bigger. So what kind of action?
So we're looking for what kind of actions, Raquel, that people are taking. What does that look like day to day?
Yes. So we've got listening. Yeah, allyship. So the way that we may amplify other people's lived experiences within the spaces that we occupy, the influence that we may have. So bringing those voices into those spaces and extending understanding of those lived experiences. Actively engaging, discussions, role modeling, engage in conversation, honest conversations, judgmental attitudes, so actions and responses, mindful. Oh, where did I see that? I did read that. Mindful of actions, yes. Very good. 92 responses. So people are adding to it, which is great. Different ways that your commitment shows up each day. So hopefully, I think we can bring it down now. Yeah. Right. So how did that feel to you? Would anyone like to share this increasing this self-awareness and of the questions that we may ask ourselves and how we interact with each other. Any thoughts? Mike?
Yeah, I think for me, there were some things in those polls that I could respond to very quickly, and others I had to actually think a little more about what is it I'm actually doing and how am I taking responsibility for things, whether it's with my team or whether it's with my family or other things that I can do that can improve my awareness and my engagement and just be more conscious and willing to do more things to improve these kind of conversations. So yeah, really useful for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. Someone mentioned in the chat thought-provoking. So hopefully you will take this thinking and questioning to your daily life, or when you want to ponder. Oh, there's more coming on. Interesting that I don't question my own mindset. Couldn't read it all.
Yeah, I think Gareth's in the chat. You might steal some of these questions to share with the team, Raquel.
Yes, please do. Yes, these are some of the questions that can bring or bring us to think about that inclusion journey. Where am I? And if
Oops, someone's not on mute there. Let me try and mute.
Okay. So there's more things in the chat. Let me see what people are saying. If I can get there. Yes, okay. In person, much easier to do, very difficult to have meaningful one-to-one engagement if most meetings are virtual with group of folk. Yes, virtual can be a barrier to some reminder to progress through actions and writing action plans. So there's a lot here in the chat as well. So understanding our own mindset as well as others. Right, very good. Thank you very much for sharing that moment. That's really important. Now it's the distributed leadership for inclusion is one of the ways that we can see how everything can fit within a framework for action. So in within HEE in the Northwest, we've piloted setting teams inclusive objectives. And this year, one of the next step is really to encourage individuals to set inclusive objectives. And by doing so, we are linking that that passion, that thinking about, okay, where am I? Where do I want to be? And then bringing the sense of what will be my next steps? What can I do in the next 6 months that will take my thought into action? So activate that commitment within the roles that we occupy within the remit of our daily, oh, sorry, I can hear myself, of our daily roles. Can you hear my echo?
Yes, yeah, I think it's someone who's just joined. Yeah, if you don't mind just popping yourselves on mute, that'd be great. Thank you.
Fantastic. So what we did in setting team objectives, and we'll look at practical objectives as well, like how this would look like, and how to implement that. So in teams, there's the sense of, for example, how do we create the spaces to have those conversations, to learn from each other? And we have that setting ourselves a goal, for example, learning more about equality, diversity, inclusion, participating in learning workshops. It's important to take it to the next level as well. Whilst doing that, thinking about how does that learning change the way I do things? How does having a learning change the ways that of our team dynamics? What do we want to change? What is the benefit of that? How will we do it? So having that, for example, the learning objective, then bringing that collective learning to our teams, creating the spaces, creating the environment. As an individual, setting objectives can be very personal, but then it can be formalized as well by adding them or by adding the inclusive objective to our appraisals, for example. So this brings that program of work that perhaps within a region or within an organization, I, as peer, my role may feel responsible to advance, but this transforms that sense of inclusion to into an organizational perspective. Everyone feeling responsible to advance equality, feeling empowered to change and become that agent of change towards inclusion. So distributed leadership has very much that sense that leadership does not belong to a particular role, but is shared. It becomes collective. And there's power in doing that. It's power in having that drive. How am I going to lead inclusion within my sphere of influence? And how, for example, one of the questions in the poll, being aware of others' perspectives. How am I going to do that? So a personal objective may be to reach out, to be curious. So I've got here the 3 C's. It's the 3 C's, something that I use in all my interactions with people in terms of learning more and advancing in our journey. The 3 C's being curious, being courageous, and being consciously inclusive. So in this individual journey is what am I curious about? What do I want to know more of, understand better? So it can be very small as I want to understand more about race, or I want to understand more about gender equity. We are just starting Women's History Month. So what can I do to advance gender equity? What can I do to become an ally to gender equity? So it can be, and then what are the steps that I'm going to take to make that a reality? So that becomes demonstrating that inclusive action, and what change would I like to see with that personal action? And then when we bring to the team realm, in terms of as a team, how would that change the way that we interact? How would that change the outcomes of our decisions? How we listen and learn from each other? And then the 3 C's there is becoming the climate. Being curious is the norm. Asking questions is the norm. Reaching out for a different opinion becomes part of the way that we work. So that's becoming then the psychological safety that we need to be ourselves, to be our best selves, to bring our authentic selves. There's an exercise we did before launching this team inclusive objectives, which was discussing together within a team's environment what makes me feel like I belong, what will enable what kind of actions and behaviors from others, my colleagues, my line manager, enable me to bring my most authentic self to work. And then we start hearing from each other what are the expectations that hold that dear, what can happen, what is this environment we want to create that will enable each other to feel safe, to feel part of, to have that sense of belonging, which then brings inclusion to life. So in terms of how these two come together, individual, team, it's the power of aligning these objectives, the power of individuals understanding what role they can play. So it's very empowering. It can become very, it's taking that ownership, sharing that ownership. And we see here at the bottom the leadership when we think of inclusive. leadership. It's really becoming aware of that authentic leadership. How am I bringing myself and role modeling that authenticity? Someone mentioned in the cloud the mutual authenticity, and how we accommodate for this difference to be permeated, to be valued, to be celebrated, to be a strength instead of a weakness. And inclusive, authentic leadership is very much part of that transformational outcome of leadership, the bringing others into the movement and bringing people in, sharing our learning and reflections and growing together in that sense. So in terms of the organization now, on the top of this diagram is really again the power of linking, aligning the objectives. So inclusive objectives aligned to our values and behaviors. So what is expected in terms of the behaviors of people within the organization, how we work with each other, but also how that inclusion is embedded within our systems. So the 3 Ps that we see is within how is inclusion shining through and being demonstrated, barriers removed in terms of our policies, our procedures, and our processes. So looking at, for example, inclusion within our recruitment and promotion practices. So everything becomes part of this overall framework. And depending on our role, we may be able to influence different dimensions at the same time. Right, so this is distributed leadership for inclusion, how it all links. I could go on, but I'm conscious of time, and you're probably wanting to have your voice heard as well. So I'm going to move on to 2 examples of inclusive objectives. So these are team inclusive objectives. And the thought now is to have your contribution to what would be the actions, what actions would demonstrate this objective, and how will we know that we are achieving? What does a good outcome of that objective look like? So one of the objectives, we will build our team's capacity and capabilities to embed inclusive practice. The first discussion you may want to have with your team is, what does that mean to us? So what is inclusive practice? What does that look like? And have that, build that vision of what we want to achieve. And then be conscious of the barriers. What might the barriers be, so that you then have actions to overcome those barriers? The same with we will create an open and safe environment where people feel able to contribute from their unique perspective. So this is an objective that will tap into the diversity within your team. And that diversity can be cognitive diversity, different ways of thinking, demographic diversity. So it's really tapping into and harnessing the power of that diversity. So how are you going to do that? And what might be the barriers to do that we'll then have to overcome? And what would be a good outcome? How do we know we are achieving or progressing? So over to you. I've got a slide after with some suggestions, but I would like to hear from you. So if you pick one objective that you think, oh, this would be great for my team, what would be the actions? How will you achieve it? And how do you know you are progressing towards it?
So if anyone would like to share anything with the group. I've got a comment there from Glenn. I think it's important to put some emphasis on actions and behaviours, not something that is always a focus. It tends to be more awareness focused. Got any thoughts on that, Raquel?
Yeah. Yes, it's again how you transform that aware. What do you do with that awareness that you've gained? So, for example, if how aware are you of what you think and where your thoughts come from? If you said somewhat aware, or you no, that one was how often you think of it, and you say sometimes, then what's stopping you from thinking more about that? Or how can you think more about that? The same way, are you ready to put in the work? Because we know uh, work to advance equity, it's not easy. We know it won't happen over time. We know that we may take one step forward and two steps back. So how do we build that resilience and keep going? How do we uh, uh, clarify on have those clear objectives? Because the clearer the objective, you may use the SMART objectives, the clearer objectives, then you've got the focus. It's having inclusive objectives is maximizing that action. So bringing from the thought or awareness to then action. So we want to be consciously inclusive. It's an intentional effort that we need to put in, and that takes energy. So we know that automatically we become resistant to it. So we need to be clear about what would be the benefit, what are the rewards of it. Something that I forgot to mention within the, the, the diagram itself is then linking inclusive practice, inclusive behaviors with reward. So that will validate the importance of inclusion. It will show that it is a priority for everyone, and that the organization itself values inclusive practice. So the same way that we reward colleagues' achievements, rewarding inclusive behaviors. So having that the full circle of how we prioritize inclusion, how we give time to it as well. So having it within our business plans as an inclusive objective for our team, it means we are going to take time to think about it, to learn from each other, to see how we're progressing towards it. So it's giving that time, allowing the space for those conversations to happen, and then being mindful of it. So there's power in it. It's I don't know if you know Paulo Coelho, a Brazilian author, very known worldwide. I think his books are like translated. Alchemist is one of them, translated in 40 or something languages. And in the book Alchemist, he says that when you want something, the whole universe conspires towards it. So by having those inclusive objectives, that common vision and purpose, it's like we are bringing the forces, creating that movement as we become agents of change, as we role modeling it. And then hopefully that positive influence will, that positive energy will also influence and bring others along. But we need to have the movement and the processes embedding it, so that even the processes and the systems are nudging us towards inclusive action. Yes, it's important to know.
Yeah, something in the chat there from Valerie. It's good to know where there are gaps in teams' capacity and capabilities, and then work how to bridge these gaps, perhaps by carving our learning or inviting the knowledge in is one way of doing that.
Yes.
And today is one demonstration of that, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think you mentioned about allowing the space, creating the time to do this. What's your experience on that, Raquel? Because everyone is so busy at the moment. How do we invest the time that's needed on this? What's the best way of doing that, would you say? What have you learned from that?
It needs to become a priority, not just in words, but in actions. So if we say that inclusion, creating an organization where people feel they belong, the best place to work, where they can bring the most authentic selves and be most productive, because that's the impact of diversity and inclusion. So when people feel they belong, they become more productive. The outcomes are more productive in terms of teams as well. The better outcomes as more representative of the communities we serve. So it's important to see to have that link. I can't remember what was the. I think I went a bit on the side there. What was your question, Mike, please?
Just you described earlier about how do we, it's important to allow the space and the time and to create the energy that's needed to do these changes and make these objectives real and put them into action. It's just, how do we do that given how busy everyone is and how exhausted people feel?
Yes. Well, there's a clear link between this morning I was just having a session on breaking the bias, becoming consciously inclusive. And there's a link when we become more vulnerable to bias and to have snappy judgments. And that's when we are most tired, when our cognitive bandwidth is higher. Let's say our bucket is filled. So in situations when we are most stressed, when we have to make snappy decisions, that is the environment that is not conducive to inclusion, to inclusive decisions, to the best decision making. So how do we stop? We need to make the space. It's like, I can give a personal example, being a parent and feeling like you need the space for yourself. You need to create the space. Otherwise, there will never be space. There will never be time. It's like meetings online. If we don't block time out for focus, for doing other work other than meeting people, then it won't happen. So we need to be proactive. We need to allow that time. And to allow that time, we need to prioritize, to see it as a priority. And others need to understand that as a priority, respect and work towards that as well. So that's part of the change, part of the click that needs to happen. So we need to allow that space and time. Otherwise, it will not happen. And in that space and time, bring ourselves and bring that possibility for change. So working towards inclusion is really opening ourselves to infinite possibilities, taking the step forward and beyond.
Wonderful. That's great, Raquel. I'm sorry to put a dampener on the party, but we're kind of coming up to a close at the moment, Raquel.
Yes, well, yes, that's fine. We are happy to share these slides with you. So here in the last slide, you've got different potential actions. Of course, how these inclusive objectives become a reality should be tailored to the gaps, as your colleague mentioned, tailored to your team and your individual situation. Something to consider in terms of challenges is one, that the time is always a challenge. So how do we overcome that? The group think, for example, in creating open and safe spaces. So how can we bring forth different opinions and how can we build our capabilities to use conflict resolution as a way to better outcomes in decision making? So there's different suggestions there. And I hope this was an insightful call for action. So the more joining the movement and becoming consciously inclusive, the more powerful our outcomes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Raquel. That was absolutely wonderful.
Thank you.
How can people get in touch with you, Raquel? I know you and I talked about this, didn't we, when we were sort of deciding what you'd like to share today. Is there a way people can contact you if they want to find out more? Is there a group you're part of that people can connect to?
Yes. Well, if part of HEE, we've got diversity and inclusion, Yama group, and a web page, an engagement web page as well. But you're more than welcome to email me if you would like to have a conversation or discuss more about this work. or even come to your team and facilitate a workshop, I'm happy to do that.
Oh, that'd be yeah, absolutely wonderful.
I'll share my email here.
Okay, yeah, that's great. Thanks, Raquel. We do have, as part of NHS Project Futures, we have a ED&I in Project and Change Management work stream. If anyone's interested in being part of that. So the festival that we ran last year, we had a number of volunteers that wanted to be part of that group, and that's looking at how do we make project and change management more accessible to underrepresented groups. And we're at that point now where we've looked at an action plan and pulled together various other things. So perhaps that could be an area of interest for people. And that's perhaps where Raquel could contribute further as well. So the next meeting we've got on the 19th of April, if anyone's interested. I'll pop our email address in the chat as well. And if you are interested, then I can send you the invites.
Thank you. And this slide is another reward you can get. I think Mike can expand on that.
Say that again, sorry, Raquel.
The reward.
Oh, sorry, yeah, the last slide that you've got there. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so we Raquel shared one at the start. This is the end game code slide. So you've got the code there for those that are taking part. Some really fantastic comments from people, Raquel. I know I'm one of those people that could spend all afternoon listening to you and contributing and talking through this. But I think what you've shared with us all today has been absolutely fantastic, and we've had some great comments from Claire and Angelica and Rachel and others. So thanks very much.
Thank you. There's one of our colleagues was also asking, suggesting to mention the learning sessions we've got. So whether you are in HE or not, you may just ask us for the link and we can share. We have different learning sessions where we expand on this reflection, either introduction to equality, diversity and inclusion, understanding the power of inclusive language, and difficulties, allyship, so how to become an effective ally, exploring microaggressions. So there's a number of learning opportunities as well, where we then have a space for dialogue and exploration. So more than welcome to attend.
Great, excellent. Thanks, Raquel. So this session has been recorded, so if you want to listen back, share it with a colleague, share it in your network, please do that. We'll let you know when the recording becomes available. Mel's just put something in the chat there for HE colleagues for the information on the learning sessions that's been described. So yeah, for those that have access to that, please visit that. So that brings the session to a close. Thanks again, Raquel.
My pleasure.
The session that follows this one starts in about 10 minutes. It's with Tim Creasy, who's the Chief Innovation Officer from ProSci. So he's going to be doing a couple of interactive sessions. For those that want to know a little bit more about activating change to their area of work and how to shape the future of change, then do join that one. It starts at 2 and it finishes at 4, but you can dip in and out, I'm sure. So one to go to. But thanks very much for coming this afternoon. I'd like to think this is the start of a larger conversation, not just with Raquel and others on today's call, but we can make some real changes in the NHS. And I think this is been a great session. Hopefully you found it been really productive. So thanks again, and have great afternoons.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bo. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, Raquel. Thanks, Mike. Great session.
Thanks,
Thank
Dolores.
you.